The crack of a Winchester rifle echoed across the rugged terrain as Gabriel Jacobs squeezed the trigger, his weathered face never flinching at the recoil. The year was 1875, and in the unforgiving landscape of the Montana Territory, weakness meant death. A thin wisp of smoke curled from the barrel as he lowered the weapon, his steel-gray eyes scanning the distant horizon where the bullet had found its mark, a coyote that had been eyeing his few remaining cattle with hungry intent. Gabriel took a long swig from his dented coffee pot, the bitter liquid burning a familiar path down his throat. The scalding sensation was the closest thing to comfort he'd known in the 3 years since he'd staked his claim on this God-forsaken stretch of land. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead just the way he preferred it. Like the anger that fueled him, it kept him alert, kept him alive. "Damned vermin," he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. Speaking aloud felt strange when there was no one to hear it but the wind and the occasional passing tumbleweed. He rarely ventured into the nearest town, Pine Creek, except for supplies and ammunition. The townsfolk had learned to give him a wide berth, whispering about the sour-faced rancher who seemed to subsist on nothing but coffee and fury. Gabriel's cabin stood as a testament to his stubborn perseverance, a modest structure of rough-hewn logs that he'd built with his own hands. The interior was Spartan, a bed, a table, a stove, and little else. No decorations adorned the walls, no curtains softened the windows. The only personal touch was a worn photograph of a woman and child, kept face down in a drawer most days. Some memories were best left undisturbed. He returned to the cabin as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the land. Another day survived. He set about preparing his usual evening meal, coffee and hardtack. His stomach had long ago stopped protesting the meager fare. Food was fuel, nothing more, and Gabriel had rid himself of most worldly pleasures when he'd buried his wife and daughter 5 years prior. The following morning arrived with a biting chill that penetrated the cabin walls. Gabriel rose before dawn, as was his habit, and stoked the embers in the stove. He had cattle to check, fences to mend, and a letter from the bank to ignore the third one this month. His land was hardly profitable, but it was his, and he'd be damned if he'd let some city banker take it from him. The day proceeded like countless others before it, hard work under an unforgiving sun, punctuated only by brief rests to drink more coffee. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, promising a storm. Gabriel eyed them warily as he repaired a section of fence that had collapsed under the weight of a fallen tree. Rain meant mud, and mud meant more work. As the first fat droplets of rain began to fall, he heard the distant sound of wagon wheels. Visitors were rare out this way and rarely welcome. Gabriel's hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip as he squinted through the gathering gloom. The wagon approached slowly, a single horse pulling it along the rutted path that passed for a road. As it drew nearer, Gabriel could make out the figure driving it, a woman, her form partially obscured by a heavy shawl. She pulled the wagon to a halt about 20 yards from where he stood. "Mr. Jacobs," she called out, her voice carrying clearly despite the increasing patter of raindrops. Gabriel didn't respond immediately, suspicion furrowing his brow. "How did she know his name, Mr. Jacobs?" she tried again. "I'm Sophia Sullivan. Doc Marshall sent me from town. He's worried about you." Gabriel scoffed. Marshall was the closest thing Pine Creek had to a doctor, an aging man who'd patched up Gabriel's arm last winter when a spooked horse had thrown him into a fence post. The old man had fretted about Gabriel's solitary existence and poor diet, but had known better than to press the issue. "Don't need no doctoring," Gabriel called back gruffly. "You can turn right around." Instead, the woman climbed down from the wagon, revealing herself to be tall and straight-backed, with auburn hair tucked beneath a practical bonnet. She reached back into the wagon and retrieved a large covered pot. "It's not doctoring I'm offering, Mr. Jacobs. It's soup." She started toward him, seemingly undeterred by his unwelcoming stance or the increasingly heavy rainfall. "Doc says you're wasting away on nothing but coffee and spite, and he's too old to make the journey himself." Gabriel's frown deepened. Doc should mind his own business. Despite his words, he didn't draw his weapon or turn away. Something about the woman's direct manner gave him pause. "Helping folks who won't help themselves is his business," Sophia replied, now close enough that Gabriel could see the determination in her hazel eyes. "And apparently mine too, for today at least. Now, are we going to stand here arguing in the rain, or can I bring this inside before we both catch our death?" For a moment, Gabriel considered sending her away with a few choice words. But the sky chose that moment to open up completely, rain now falling in sheets. With a grunt that might have been assent, he turned and stalked toward the cabin, not bothering to see if she followed. Sophia did follow, carrying the pot carefully as she navigated the muddy ground. By the time they reached the cabin, both were thoroughly soaked. Gabriel pushed open the door and entered, making no move to help her with her burden. The interior of the cabin was dim, lit only by the faint glow from the stove. Gabriel struck a match and lit a lantern, illuminating the sparse furnishings. He was suddenly aware of how unwelcoming the place appeared and found himself inexplicably bothered by it. "You can set that down and be on your way," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the table. "Weather's only getting worse." Sophia set the pot down but made no move to leave. Instead, she removed her sodden shawl and hung it near the stove. "I'll be going nowhere in this downpour, Mr. Jacobs. Doc made me promise to see you eat something proper, and I aim to keep that promise." Gabriel's jaw clenched. "I don't recall inviting you to stay." "No, you didn't," Sophia agreed, seemingly untroubled by his hostility. "But hospitality dictates you shouldn't send a body out in weather like this." She nodded toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. "Besides, I've brought enough soup for two and I haven't eaten since morning." Without waiting for his response, she began looking around for bowls and spoons. Gabriel watched in disbelief as this stranger made herself at home in his cabin. "Top shelf," he finally said, pointing to a crude cupboard when it became clear she wouldn't be deterred. Sophia retrieved 2 bowls and spoons, then lifted the lid from the pot. The rich aroma of chicken and vegetables filled the small space, making Gabriel's stomach growl traitorously. He couldn't remember the last time he'd smelled something so enticing. "Sit," she instructed, ladling soup into both bowls. "It'll do you good." Gabriel remained standing for a moment longer, a battle of wills playing out internally. Pride urged him to throw her out, hunger and a strange curiosity compelled him to stay. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Sophia placed a bowl before him, then took the seat opposite. She bowed her head briefly in a silent grace before picking up her spoon. Gabriel watched her for a moment, then cautiously tried the soup. The flavor burst across his tongue, rich and savory. He couldn't prevent the small sound of appreciation that escaped him. Sophia smiled slightly but said nothing, focusing on her own meal. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the storm raging outside. When Gabriel finished, he found himself staring at the empty bowl with a peculiar sense of loss. "There's more," Sophia said, already rising to refill his bowl before he could protest. Gabriel accepted the second serving without comment. As he ate, he found himself studying his unexpected guest. Sophia Sullivan appeared to be in her late 20s, with a face that was more handsome than pretty. Her hands were work-roughened, suggesting she was no stranger to hard labor, yet there was a gentleness to her movements that spoke of care and consideration. "Why did Marshall send you?" he asked abruptly. "He's got no call to be concerning himself with my affairs." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "He said you reminded him of his brother who wasted away from grief and stubbornness, said he wouldn't stand by and watch it happen again if he could help it." Gabriel scowled. "I'm not wasting away." "No, when's the last time you had a proper meal that wasn't coffee and hardtack?" When he didn't answer, she continued, "That's what I thought. Doc's worried and he's not wrong to be." "So he sent a woman I've never met to save me from myself." Gabriel's tone was scathing. "He sent me because I owed him a favor and because I make the best chicken soup in 3 counties, Sophia replied evenly. "And because I'm not easily scared off by a man's bark when I suspect there's little bite behind it." Gabriel's eyebrows rose at her boldness. You don't know me, Miss Sullivan? No, I don't, she agreed. But I know grief when I see it, Mr. Jacobs, and I know it doesn't sustain a person for long. The words struck uncomfortably close to home, and Gabriel pushed back from the table, the reins letting up. You should head back to town before it gets dark. Sophia glanced toward the window where the rain continued unabated. It's not letting up, and you know it. I'll need to stay the night. Gabriel stiffened. That wouldn't be proper. A flash of amusement crossed Sophia's face. I didn't take you for a man concerned with proprieties, Mr. Jacobs, but rest assured I'll be perfectly comfortable in my wagon once the rain stops. And if it doesn't stop, then I suppose I'll sleep in that chair, she said, nodding toward the single armchair near the stove. I've slept in worse places. Gabriel frowned, caught between irritation at her presumption and a reluctant admiration for her practical nature. Take the bed, he finally muttered. I'll use the chair. Sophia looked as if she might argue, but then nodded. Thank you. The rest of the evening passed in an uneasy truce. Sophia washed the dishes despite Gabriel's gruff assertion that he'd do it later, then set about organizing his meager food supplies while he tended to the stove. The storm showed no signs of abating, thunder occasionally rattling the windows and sending flashes of lightning through the cabin. As night fell, the awkwardness of the situation became more pronounced. Gabriel was acutely aware of Sophia's presence in a space that had known only his solitude for years. He found himself watching her from the corner of his eye as she moved about, noting the graceful efficiency of her actions. You have flour and salt but no bread, she observed at one point. Never learned to bake, Gabriel replied shortly. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. I could show you if you like, it's simple enough. Gabriel made a non-committal sound, neither accepting nor rejecting the offer. The idea of her returning was disquieting. He'd grown accustomed to his isolation, had wrapped it around himself like armor. This woman threatened to pierce that armor with nothing more than soup and casual conversation. As the hour grew late, Gabriel dragged the armchair closer to the stove and arranged a blanket over it while Sophia used the wash basin to freshen up. When she emerged, her hair was loose around her shoulders, a rich auburn cascade that caught the lamplight. Good night, Mr. Jacobs, she said, making her way to the bed, and thank you for the shelter. Gabriel merely nodded, settling into the chair and stretching his long legs toward the stove's warmth. He listened as Sophia climbed into bed, the frame creaking slightly under her weight. The thought of a woman in his bed in the bed he'd once shared with his wife should have been painful, but instead, it stirred something long dormant within him. Not desire, precisely, but perhaps a remembrance of what it was like not to be entirely alone. Sleep eluded him for much of the night. The chair was uncomfortable, but that wasn't what kept him awake. It was the sound of Sophia's steady breathing, the occasional rustle as she turned in her sleep. It was the lingering scent of the soup that had somehow made the cabin feel more like a home than it had in years. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and a sky of perfect blue. Gabriel rose stiffly from the chair to find Sophia already awake and rekindling the stove fire. You should have woken me, he said, his voice rough with sleep. You looked like you needed the rest, she replied. I hope you don't mind, but I've started coffee. The pot was indeed beginning to bubble on the stove, the familiar aroma filling the cabin. Gabriel found himself oddly touched by the gesture. I'll be heading back to town once I've had a cup, Sophia continued, pouring the dark liquid into 2 mugs. Doc will be wondering what became of me. Gabriel accepted the mug she offered, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. The trails will be muddy, might be slow going. I've navigated worse. Sophia sipped her coffee, grimacing slightly at the strength, though perhaps with better coffee. Despite himself, Gabriel felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. It keeps a man alert, or could wake the dead, she retorted, but there was no malice in her tone. They drank their coffee in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. When they finished, Sophia gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. At the door, she hesitated. Mr. Jacobs, there's still plenty of soup left. It should keep for another day or 2 if you reheat it properly. Gabriel nodded. I'm obliged, and perhaps. Sophia seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. Perhaps I might bring more in a week or so. Doc would rest easier knowing you're getting proper meals now and then. Gabriel should have refused. He should have told her that he neither needed nor wanted her charity or her concern. Instead, he found himself saying, "If you've a mind to, I won't turn it away." A smile brightened Sophia's face, transforming it in a way that made Gabriel's breath catch unexpectedly. "Then I'll see you in a week, Mr. Jacobs." He watched from the doorway as she hitched her horse to the wagon and climbed up onto the seat. She raised a hand in farewell before setting off down the muddy track, her straight-backed posture visible until the wagon disappeared around a bend. Gabriel returned to the cabin, which suddenly seemed emptier than it had the day before. The pot of soup sat on the stove, a tangible reminder of Sophia's visit. He ladled some into a bowl and ate it cold, finding it still flavorful despite the chill. As he went about his chores that day, Gabriel found his thoughts returning to Sophia Sullivan more often than he cared to admit. There was something about her, a strength combined with kindness, that had left an impression. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to something other than the oblivion of sleep at day's end. True to her word, Sophia returned the following week. This time, she brought not only soup but freshly baked bread and a small jar of preserved peaches. Gabriel, who had spent the morning scanning the horizon more frequently than usual, pretended surprise at her arrival. "Thought you might have forgotten," he said as he helped her down from the wagon. "I'm a woman of my word, Mr. Jacobs," she replied, handing him the bread wrapped in a clean cloth. "Besides, Doc was most insistent I check on you again." Gabriel doubted that was the entire truth, but he didn't press the matter. Instead, he carried her offerings inside, noting that she'd brought more than could be consumed in a single meal. "Planning to stay for supper?" he asked, more gruffly than he'd intended. "If I'm welcome," Sophia answered, watching him carefully. Gabriel busied himself with arranging the food on the table. "Wouldn't make sense for you to ride all this way just to turn around." It was as close to an invitation as he could manage, but Sophia seemed to understand. She removed her bonnet and set about warming the soup while Gabriel fetched water from the well. They ate together as the sun began its descent, casting golden light through the cabin windows. The bread was still warm, and Gabriel couldn't remember the last time he'd tasted anything so satisfying. The peaches were a rare treat, sweet and tangy against his tongue. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Conversation didn't come naturally to him anymore. Sophia looked pleased at his interest. "My mother taught me the basics, but I've always enjoyed experimenting. When my husband died, cooking became a comfort of sorts, a way to create something good from nothing." Gabriel paused mid-bite. "Your husband?" "Thomas Sullivan." Sophia's expression softened with memory. "He died 3 years ago, typhoid fever." "I'm sorry," Gabriel said, the words inadequate but sincere. "As am I for whatever loss has made you retreat from the world, Mr. Jacobs." Sophia's gaze was direct but gentle. Gabriel looked down at his bowl. "Gabriel," he said after a moment. "If you're going to keep bringing me food, you might as well use my given name." "Gabriel," Sophia repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "And I'm Sophia, not Miss Sullivan." A brief nod was his only acknowledgement, but something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle warming, like ice beginning to thaw. After they finished eating, Gabriel found himself reluctant for the evening to end. "Coffee," he offered. "Only if you'll let me make it," Sophia replied with a small smile. "Yours could strip paint." Gabriel raised an eyebrow but gestured toward the coffee pot in acquiescence. He watched as she measured the grounds with a more conservative hand than he would have used, adding a pinch of salt that she explained would cut the bitterness. When she handed him a mug of the resulting brew, he took a cautious sip, expecting disappointment. Instead, he found the coffee smooth and rich, the bitterness mellowed without sacrificing strength. "It's good," he admitted, earning another of those transformative smiles from Sophia. She departed before nightfall this time, but not before extracting a promise that he would eat the remaining food she'd brought. As Gabriel watched her wagon grow smaller in the distance, He realized he was already counting the days until her next visit. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Sophia would arrive every Wednesday, bringing food and conversation that gradually became less strained and more genuine. Gabriel found himself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that both puzzled and alarmed him. He began making small improvements to the cabin, fixing the wobbly table, adding a second chair, even hanging curtains that Sophia had brought to keep out the morning glare. For her part, Sophia never pushed for more than Gabriel was willing to give. She didn't ask about the photograph he'd finally placed on the mantel his wife Caroline and daughter Emma, both lost to a fever that had swept through their previous homestead in Kansas. But she noticed the small changes in the cabin and in Gabriel himself. The trimmed beard, the mended shirts, the occasional smile that would flicker across his face when she told a story about the town's happenings. One Wednesday in late summer, Gabriel waited all day, but Sophia didn't come. As evening approached with no sign of her wagon, concern gnawed at him. It wasn't like her to break a pattern without warning. By nightfall, his worry had transformed into a restlessness that drove him to saddle his horse and ride toward Pine Creek, something he hadn't done on his own initiative in months. The town was quiet when he arrived, most establishments closed for the night. The doctor's office, however, still showed a light in the window. Gabriel tethered his horse and approached, his heart pounding with an anxiety he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Doc Marshall answered his knock, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Gabriel Jacobs, as I live and breathe." "What brings you to town at this hour?" "Sophia," Gabriel said simply. "She didn't come today." Understanding dawned in the older man's eyes. "Ah, she's been helping at the Hendersons' place. Their youngest came down with a fever 2 days ago, and Sophia's been taking turns sitting with the child." She likely lost track of the days. Relief flooded through Gabriel, followed quickly by embarrassment at his overreaction. "I see, well then." Marshall studied him with a knowing look. "The Hendersons live just past the church, blue house with white trim." "I'm sure Sophia would appreciate knowing you were concerned enough to come looking for her." Gabriel hesitated, torn between the urge to retreat and a stronger desire to see for himself that Sophia was well. "Is the child's fever? Is it serious?" "Breaking already," Marshall assured him. "Nothing like," he stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing where Gabriel's thoughts had gone. "Just a summer fever. The boy will be fine." With a nod of thanks, Gabriel remounted his horse and rode slowly through town. The Hendersons' house was easy to spot, one of the few with lights still burning in the windows. He dismounted and approached the door, suddenly uncertain of his welcome. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing Sophia with a basin of water in her hands. She froze at the sight of him, eyes widening in surprise. "Gabriel, what are you doing here?" He shifted uncomfortably, hat in his hands. "You didn't come. I was concerned." A soft expression crossed Sophia's face. "I'm sorry, I should have sent word. Young Tommy Henderson took ill and I've been helping his mother tend to him." "So," Marshall said, "the boy is improving?" "Yes, his fever broke this afternoon. He's sleeping now." Sophia stepped outside, closing the door gently behind her. "I was just going to empty this basin." Gabriel took it from her hands. "I'll do it." He emptied the water near a drainage ditch, then returned to find Sophia watching him with a curious expression. "You rode all this way in the dark because you were worried about me?" she asked. Gabriel felt heat rise to his face. "It wasn't like you to miss a Wednesday without warning." Sophia's lips curved in a smile. "No, I suppose it wasn't." She glanced back at the house. "I promised Mrs. Henderson I'd stay until morning, but I'm free to return home after that. Perhaps you could escort me." The trail can be lonely for a single traveler. The invitation in her words was clear, and Gabriel found himself nodding. "I could do that. I'll find a room at the boarding house and meet you here at dawn." "Thank you, Gabriel." Sophia reached out impulsively and squeezed his hand before disappearing back into the house. Gabriel stood for a moment, looking at the hand she had touched, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer night. The boarding house keeper was surprised to see him, but provided a clean, if small, room. Gabriel lay awake for much of the night, thinking about the woman who had somehow become essential to his existence without him fully realizing it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Gabriel met Sophia as planned, and they set out together, her wagon following his horse along the trail back to his homestead. The journey, which had always seemed long and solitary before, passed quickly with Sophia pointing out wildflowers and birds along the way. When they reached the cabin, Gabriel found himself oddly nervous. It was the first time Sophia had come without the pretense of delivering food, and he wasn't sure what that meant for either of them. "Would you like some coffee?" he offered as he helped her down from the wagon. "I'll make it your way." Sophia's smile was warm. "I'd like that very much." Inside the cabin, Gabriel busied himself with the coffee while Sophia moved about the space with familiar ease, straightening a blanket here, adjusting a curtain there. It struck him how naturally she fit into his home and how empty it would seem when she left. "I've been thinking," he said abruptly as they sat with their coffee. "This place, it's too much for one person to manage properly." Sophia tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. "The cattle need better care. The garden you suggested, I haven't had time to start it. The roof needs patching before winter." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I could use help, permanent help." Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes. "Are you offering me a job, Gabriel Jacobs?" "No." He set down his mug and looked directly at her. "I'm offering you a partnership of sorts if you were inclined to consider it." "A partnership," Sophia repeated slowly. "What exactly would that entail?" Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by his inability to express himself clearly. "Marriage," he finally said, the word feeling foreign on his tongue. "I'm asking if you would consider becoming my wife." Sophia's expression was unreadable, for practical reasons. "To help with the cattle and the garden." "No, yes, partly." Gabriel stood and paced the small room. "I'm not good with words, Sophia, but these past months with you coming here, the cabin feels wrong when you're not in it. Empty. I find myself watching the trail on days you're not due to arrive, hoping you might come anyway. I sleep better knowing you're safe, and I worry when you don't appear as expected." He stopped pacing and faced her. "I don't know if that's love the way poets write about it. But I know I want you here, not just on Wednesdays, every day if you'll have me." Sophia rose from her chair and approached him, her expression softening. "Gabriel, are you certain? I know what it cost you to open your heart again after losing your family." "I'll never forget them," he said quietly, "but you've shown me there can be life after loss. You brought more than soup when you came here, Sophia. You brought hope." Tears shimmered in Sophia's eyes as she reached up to touch his face. "Then yes, Gabriel Jacobs, I will marry you. Not to tend your cattle or patch your roof, but because I've come to love the man behind the anger and grief. The man who rides through the night to make sure I'm safe, who drinks terrible coffee without complaint, who watches the trail for my wagon with the same anticipation I feel every Wednesday as I approach this cabin." Gabriel's hand covered hers, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I'm not an easy man, Sophia. I doubt I ever will be." "I don't want easy," she replied, smiling through her tears. "I want you." Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened into something more urgent. When they finally parted, both breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked. "How soon can we marry?" Sophia laughed, the sound like music in the cabin that had known too much silence. "Eager are we. We'll need to post banns at the church. 3 weeks, traditionally." 3 weeks, Gabriel repeated, already calculating the days in his mind. "It will give us time to prepare," Sophia said practically, "and for you to be certain this is what you want." Gabriel tightened his arms around her. "I've never been more certain of anything." The following 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. News of their engagement spread quickly through Pine Creek, met with a mixture of surprise and approval. Doc Marshall was particularly pleased, taking credit for what he called his most successful prescription yet. Gabriel found himself in town more frequently than he had been in years, accompanying Sophia as she made arrangements for their simple ceremony. He endured fittings for a new suit, accepted congratulations from townspeople whose names he barely remembered, and watched with amazement as Sophia transformed his solitary existence with her plans for their shared future. At the cabin, they worked side by side preparing for the changes to come. Gabriel built a larger bed frame while Sophia sewed new curtains and a wedding quilt. They cleared ground for the garden she would plant in the spring and discussed improvements to the cattle operation. The day before their wedding, Gabriel rode into town alone. He had one last task to complete, something he'd been contemplating for weeks. The jeweler's shop was small but well stocked, and the proprietor helped him select a simple gold band with a small ruby, reminiscent of the color of Sophia's hair in sunlight. As he rode home with the ring safely tucked in his pocket, Gabriel reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The bitter man who had existed on coffee and anger seemed like a stranger, now someone he might have become permanently if not for a persistent woman with a pot of soup and a determination to stay. Their wedding day dawned clear and cool, the aspens beginning to turn golden with the approach of autumn. The church in Pine Creek was filled with well-wishers, many of whom Gabriel recognized from his increased visits to town. Sophia had no family nearby, but the community had embraced her as one of their own in the 3 years since she'd arrived as a widow. Gabriel stood at the altar, uncharacteristically nervous in his new suit. When the door opened and Sophia appeared, a simple bouquet of wildflowers in her hands and a radiant smile on her face, his nervousness vanished. This was right. This was meant to be. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They exchanged vows and rings, Gabriel's voice steady as he promised to cherish and protect the woman who had brought light back into his life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was a promise of all that was to come. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with food contributed by many of the townsfolk. Gabriel found himself actually enjoying the company and conversation, particularly when he could look across the room and see Sophia, now his wife, laughing with friends. As evening approached, they took their leave, eager to return to the cabin that would now truly be their home. The ride back was filled with comfortable silence and occasional bursts of conversation as they planned and dreamed together. At the cabin, Gabriel lifted Sophia from the wagon and carried her across the threshold, a tradition she had insisted upon. Inside, the space seemed transformed not by any physical changes, but by the knowledge that it was now their shared sanctuary. That night, as moonlight streamed through the curtained windows, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that gave way to passion. Gabriel, who had thought himself incapable of such feelings again, found in Sophia's arms a healing he hadn't known he needed. In the quiet aftermath, as Sophia slept beside him, Gabriel looked around the cabin that had once been merely a place to exist and was now becoming a home. On the mantel, the photograph of Caroline and Emmer remained a tribute to the family he had lost. But beside it now stood a new photograph, taken on their wedding day, of the family he was building anew. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, a sound that had once seemed lonely but now felt like a lullaby. Gabriel pulled Sophia closer and closed his eyes, grateful for the woman who had brought soup and stayed, and in doing so, had saved him from himself. As autumn deepened into winter, Gabriel and Sophia settled into the rhythms of married life. The cabin, once stark and utilitarian, grew warmer with Sophia's influence. Curtains softened the windows, a colorful quilt brightened the bed, and the aroma of home-cooked meals regularly filled the air. But more than these physical changes, it was Sophia's presence that transformed the space. Her laughter, her humming as she worked, the light touch of her hand on Gabriel's shoulder as she passed. For Gabriel, the adjustment to sharing his life was both challenging and rewarding. There were moments when old habits of solitude reasserted themselves, when he retreated into silence or sought the isolation of long rides across his property. But Sophia understood these needs, giving him space when required while ensuring he never retreated completely into the shell of bitterness he had constructed after losing his first family. The first major test of their new partnership came with the early winter storms. A blizzard swept down from the north with little warning, trapping them in the cabin for 3 days. In the past, Gabriel would have endured such confinement alone, his only companion the coffee pot and the gnawing anger that had sustained him for so long. With Sophia, the enforced seclusion became an unexpected gift, time to talk, to plan, to learn each other's stories more deeply. "Tell me about Caroline," Sophia said one evening as they sat before the fire, her head resting against his shoulder. "And Emma, I want to know them." Gabriel tensed momentarily, then relaxed. This was Sophia, the woman who had breached his defenses with nothing more than soup and patience. If he could trust anyone with the memories he had guarded so jealously, it was her. "Caroline was quiet," he began, the words coming slowly at first. "Not shy, just thoughtful." She considered her words carefully. "Emma was the opposite, a chatterbox from the moment she could form sentences, always asking questions, wanting to know how things worked." As he spoke, the memories that had been too painful to examine became treasures to share. Caroline's talent for sketching the Kansas landscape, Emma's delight in discovering frogs by the creek, the way his first wife had possessed an uncanny ability to calm troubled horses with nothing more than a soft word and gentle touch. "They would have liked you," he concluded, his voice rough with emotion. "Caroline would have appreciated your practicality, and Emma, she would have followed you everywhere, begging to help with whatever you were doing." Sophia's eyes were damp when she looked up at him. "Thank you for telling me about them, for sharing them with me." Gabriel pressed a kiss to her forehead. "They're part of who I am, even when I tried to bury those memories in anger." "And now," Sophia asked softly, "now I'm finding there's room for both honoring their memory and building a future with you." He tightened his arm around her shoulders. "You've given me that gift, Sophia, the ability to remember without drowning in grief." The storm eventually passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. Together, they dug paths to the barn and checked on the cattle, working as a team to ensure the animals had feed and unfrozen water. Gabriel found himself appreciating Sophia's strength and practicality anew, watching as she shouldered her share of the work without complaint despite the bitter cold. As winter settled in fully, their evenings fell into a comfortable pattern. After the day's work was done, they would share a meal at the table Gabriel had expanded to accommodate their family gatherings. Then, while Gabriel cleaned his rifle or repaired tack by the fire, Sophia would often read aloud from one of the books she'd brought from town, stories of adventure or romance that transported them beyond the snowed-in boundaries of their homestead. Sometimes, when the reading was done, Gabriel would speak of his own adventures, cattle drives in Texas before he'd met Caroline, encounters with outlaws and Indians, the journey that had brought him first to Kansas and later to Montana. Sophia listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking questions that drew out details he might otherwise have omitted. "You've lived enough for 3 lifetimes," she observed one night after a particularly harrowing tale of a stampede he'd survived in his younger days. Gabriel shrugged, uncomfortable with what felt like praise for merely having endured. "I've just been fortunate, or stubborn enough not to die when it might have been easier." "I'm grateful for that stubbornness," Sophia said, moving to sit at his feet and rest her head against his knee. "It kept you alive long enough for me to find you." He stroked her hair, marveling at its softness between his fingers. "Is that what happened? You found me?" she murmured, leaning into his touch. "Doc may have sent me that first day, but I kept coming back on my own." "There was something about you behind all that gruffness and coffee that called to me." Gabriel chuckled, the sound still somewhat unfamiliar in his throat. "If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here with a wife who claims to have been attracted to my gruffness, I'd have thought you'd been drinking something stronger than coffee." "Not the gruffness itself," Sophia corrected, looking up at him with a smile. "What I saw beneath it. A good man who'd lost his way but hadn't lost his fundamental decency." "You saw more clearly than I could," Gabriel admitted. "All I knew was anger. And coffee," Sophia added, her eyes twinkling. "Don't forget the coffee." Their laughter mingled in the warm air of the cabin, a sound that would have seemed impossible to Gabriel not so long ago. Christmas approached, bringing with it a new set of traditions to navigate. In his years of solitude, Gabriel had ignored the holiday entirely, treating it as just another day of survival. Sophia, however, had other ideas. She decorated the cabin with pine boughs and red berries gathered from the property, hung stockings by the fireplace, and spent days baking special treats that filled the house with the scents of cinnamon and nutmeg. Gabriel watched these preparations with bemused tolerance that gradually shifted to genuine appreciation as he witnessed Sophia's joy in the process. "We should have a tree," she declared one morning in mid-December. "A small one just for the corner by the window." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "A tree inside the house." "It's tradition," Sophia insisted. "My parents always had one, and Thomas and I continued the practice. We'll decorate it with strings of cranberries and paper stars." The mention of Thomas still occasionally caught Gabriel off guard, the reminder that Sophia, too, had loved and lost before finding her way to him. But rather than jealousy, he felt a strange kinship with the man who had been her first husband. They had both recognized the extraordinary quality of the woman now standing before him, hands on hips, arguing for a Christmas tree. "All right," he conceded, unable to resist her enthusiasm. "I'll find you a tree." The smile he received in return was worth the effort of trudging through snow to locate the perfect small pine and dragging it back to the cabin. Together, they set it up in the corner, securing it in a bucket of sand. Sophia produced cranberries and needle and thread, and they spent the evening creating garlands for the tree while she taught him Christmas carols he had long forgotten. On Christmas morning, Gabriel woke early, slipping from bed without disturbing Sophia. He had a surprise planned, one that had required secretive correspondence with the mercantile owner in Pine Creek and a clandestine trip to town while Sophia visited with Doc Marshall's wife. When Sophia awoke, she found Gabriel waiting by the decorated tree, a small package in his hands. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Merry Christmas," he said, holding out the gift with uncharacteristic shyness. Sophia unwrapped the package carefully, gasping when she revealed a beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of drawing pencils. "Gabriel, they're perfect, but how did you know?" "You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal before Thomas died, and I've seen you sketching with that stubby pencil you keep in your apron pocket." He shuffled his feet slightly. "I thought perhaps you might want to start again." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she ran her fingers over the supple leather cover. "Thank you, this means more than I can say." She rose and went to the dresser, returning with a package of her own. "I have something for you as well." Gabriel unwrapped the gift to find a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, along with a small carved wooden box. Opening the box, he discovered a new pocket watch to replace the one he'd pawned years ago during a particularly difficult winter. "Sophia, this is too much," he protested, even as his fingers traced the engraving on the watch's silver case, their initials and wedding date. "Nonsense," she replied firmly. "A man should have a proper watch, and the scarf will keep you warm on those long rides to check the north pasture." Gabriel pulled her into an embrace, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gifts and what they represented: Sophia's attention to his needs, her desire to care for him in ways both practical and meaningful. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, the words still new enough to feel momentous each time he spoke them. Sophia's arms tightened around him. "And I love you, my coffee-drinking, angry cowboy who isn't so angry anymore." The remainder of the day was spent in simple pleasures: a special meal, an exchange of stories about Christmases past, and a walk through the snow-covered property as the winter sun cast long blue shadows across the pristine white landscape. Gabriel found himself noticing beauty he would have overlooked before: the intricate pattern of frost on a pine branch, the way the last light of day turned the snow to gold, the perfect outline of Sophia's profile against the evening sky. As winter slowly relinquished its grip on the land, Gabriel and Sophia began planning for spring. The cattle operation needed expansion if they were to make the ranch truly profitable, and Sophia's ideas for a large kitchen garden and perhaps even a few fruit trees would require careful preparation. "We should consider hiring help," Sophia suggested one evening as they reviewed their finances. The ledger showed improvement since their marriage. Sophia's careful management had eliminated waste, and her occasional sales of baked goods in town provided a small but steady additional income. Gabriel frowned. "Hired hands mean another mouth to feed, a wage to pay. And more cattle we can manage, more land we can utilize," Sophia countered. "You can't do everything yourself, Gabriel, and while I'm willing to help wherever I can, there are limits to what the two of us can accomplish alone." The logic was sound, but Gabriel struggled with the idea of bringing a stranger into the operation he had managed alone for so long. "I'll think on it," he finally said, which they both knew was neither a yes nor a definitive no. Sophia accepted this compromise with good grace, knowing that pushing would only strengthen Gabriel's resistance. She had learned when to press and when to allow him time to come around to an idea on his own terms. As the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing patches of muddy ground and the first tentative sprouts of new grass, Sophia fell ill. At first, it seemed nothing more serious than a spring cold fatigue, occasional nausea, a tendency to tire more quickly than usual. Gabriel watched with concern as she pushed through her daily tasks with determination but diminished energy. "Perhaps we should ride into town, have Marshall take a look at you," he suggested one morning when he found her resting at the table, her face paler than usual. Sophia smiled, a secretive curve of her lips that puzzled him. "That won't be necessary. I know exactly what ails me." Gabriel's concern deepened. "You do? What is it?" "Something that will resolve itself in about 7 months," Sophia replied, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Gabriel, we're going to have a baby." For a moment, Gabriel stood perfectly still, the words echoing in his mind without fully registering. Then understanding dawned, bringing with it a tidal wave of emotions: joy, fear, hope, and a resurgence of the old grief as memories of Emma flashed through his mind. "A baby," he repeated, his voice barely audible. "You're certain?" Sophia nodded, watching him carefully. "I've suspected for a few weeks now. All the signs are there." Gabriel crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Are you happy about this?" "Very happy," Sophia assured him, squeezing his hands. "But I'll understand if you need time to adjust to the idea. I know this might bring back difficult memories." Gabriel shook his head, bringing one hand up to cup her cheek. "No, Sophia, I'm happy too." Terrified but happy. He placed his other hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A new life, our child." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and adjustment. Gabriel's protective instincts surged to the forefront, leading him to attempt to shield Sophia from any task he deemed too strenuous. This well-intentioned coddling was met with amused tolerance initially, then increasingly firm resistance, as Sophia insisted on maintaining her normal activities as long as she felt able. "I'm pregnant, Gabriel, not made of glass," she informed him one afternoon when he tried to prevent her from helping with the spring garden planting. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I promise to rest when I need to, but I won't be treated as an invalid." Gabriel reluctantly conceded, though he found himself watching her constantly for signs of fatigue or discomfort. His concern was rooted not only in love, but in fear. The memory of how quickly illness had taken Caroline and Emma remained a shadow in his mind, one that Sophia understood without him having to articulate it. "This is different," she assured him one night as they lay together, his hand protectively spread across the small swell of her belly. "I'm healthy. The baby is healthy. Doc Marshall will be checking on us regularly." Gabriel pressed his face into her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. "I know. But I can't help worrying." "That's what fathers do," Sophia said softly. "They worry and they provide and they love." She turned in his arms to face him. "Our child will be so loved, Gabriel, by both of us." As spring blossomed into summer, Gabriel finally relented on the matter of hired help. The increasing demands of the ranch, combined with Sophia's advancing pregnancy, made it impossible to ignore the practical necessity. Through Doc Marshall's recommendation, they hired young Peter Jensen, the son of a neighboring rancher who was eager to learn the cattle business and save money for his own homestead. Peter proved to be a blessing, hardworking, respectful, and quick to learn Gabriel's methods. With his help, they were able to increase the herd size and improve the northern pasture fencing, projects that had been beyond Gabriel's capacity alone. The young man took his meals with them but slept in a small cabin Gabriel, and he constructed at the edge of the property, providing both proximity for work and privacy for the expanding family. As Sophia's pregnancy progressed, her body changing to accommodate the growing child within, Gabriel found himself marveling at the transformation. The roundness of her belly, the fullness of her breasts, the occasional flutter of movement he could feel when he placed his hand against her skin, all were miraculous to him, signs of the new life they had created together. They spent the warm summer evenings on the porch Gabriel had added to the cabin, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. Often they would talk about the future, their hopes for the child, plans for expanding the ranch, dreams of perhaps building a larger house as their family grew. "What if it's a girl?" Gabriel asked one such evening, the question that had been on his mind for weeks finally finding voice. Sophia smiled, her hand automatically moving to her belly where the baby had just delivered a particularly enthusiastic kick. "Then she'll be as strong and stubborn as her father, I expect. And as kind and determined as her mother," Gabriel added. He hesitated, then asked the question that truly concerned him. Would you object if, should we have a daughter, we named her Emma?" Sophia's expression softened with understanding. "I think that would be a beautiful tribute. Emma Jacobs II." Gabriel swallowed hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "And if it's a boy?" "I've always been fond of the name Samuel," Sophia suggested, "after my father, but I'm open to other ideas." "Samuel Jacobs," Gabriel tested the name, finding he liked the solid, dependable sound of it. "A good name for a rancher, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever he chooses to become," Sophia said with a laugh. "Let's not plan the poor child's entire future before he's even born." Gabriel chuckled, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "Fair enough. But I hope, boy or girl, they inherit your spirit rather than my tendency toward brooding." "A little of both would make for an interesting person, I think," Sophia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler temperatures and the golden hue of changing leaves, Sophia's time grew near. Gabriel found himself increasingly anxious, checking and rechecking the route to town, ensuring the wagon was in perfect condition for the journey when the moment arrived. He arranged with Peter to handle the ranch operations in his absence, and made Doc Marshall promise to send word if he needed to leave town for any reason. "You're driving yourself to distraction with worry," Sophia observed one evening as Gabriel paced the cabin floor, mentally reviewing his preparations for the 5th time that day. "Come sit with me, feel how strong our child is." Gabriel obeyed, placing his hand where she indicated. A powerful kick greeted his touch, and despite his concerns, he smiled. "Strong indeed, like their mother." "And their father," Sophia added, covering his hand with her own. "Gabriel, I know you're afraid. I understand why, but I need you to have faith in me, in Doc Marshall, in God, if that helps. This baby and I, we're going to be fine." Gabriel met her steady gaze and drew strength from the confidence he saw there. "I'm trying, Sophia. I promise you I'm trying." The baby, however, had plans of its own. 2 weeks before their expected journey to town, Sophia woke in the middle of the night with a sharp intake of breath. "Gabriel," she whispered, gripping his arm. "I think it's time." Gabriel was instantly alert, fear and excitement warring within him. "Now, are you certain?" A contraction seized Sophia, answering his question more effectively than words could have. When it passed, she nodded, her face pale but determined. Quite certain, but I don't think we have time to reach town. Gabriel's heart raced with panic. We have to try. I'll hitch the wagon immediately. No, Sophia's voice was firm despite her discomfort. The baby is coming too quickly. We won't make it to town and I won't give birth in a wagon on the trail. She squeezed his hand. You'll need to help me, Gabriel, and send Peter for Doc Marshall. For a moment, Gabriel felt paralyzed by terror. The memory of Caroline's difficult labor with Emma, though years in the past, rose vividly in his mind. But then he looked at Sophia, his wife, his partner, the woman who had brought life back to his world with nothing more than soup and persistence, and found his resolve. All right, he said, gathering his courage. Tell me what to do. The next hours were a blur of activity. Gabriel sent Peter galloping toward town with instructions to bring the doctor as quickly as possible. Then he set about preparing the cabin according to Sophia's remarkably calm directions, boiling water, gathering clean linens, positioning the bed for her comfort. Between contractions, Sophia guided him, drawing on knowledge she had gained assisting at other births in town. During the pains, which grew increasingly intense, she gripped his hand with surprising strength, her face contorted but her spirit undiminished. You're doing wonderfully, Gabriel assured her, wiping her brow with a cool cloth as one particularly powerful contraction subsided. Sophia managed a strained smile. So are you for a man who looks like he might faint at any moment. Her ability to jest even in such circumstances bolstered Gabriel's confidence. They could do this together, as they had faced every challenge since she had entered his life. Dawn was breaking when Sophia announced it was time to push. Gabriel positioned himself to receive the baby, his hands trembling but his voice steady as he encouraged her through each effort. And then, with a final powerful push, their child slipped into the world and into his waiting hands, a perfect, red-faced little girl with a shock of dark hair. For a heartbeat, Gabriel stared in wonder at the tiny being he held, overcome by a rush of love so intense it nearly took his breath away. Then the baby let out a lusty cry and he laughed through tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Sophia, she's beautiful, perfect. He wrapped the infant in a clean towel and placed her on Sophia's chest. We have a daughter. Sophia's face, though etched with exhaustion, glowed with joy as she cradled their child. Emma, she whispered. Hello, little one, we've been waiting for you. Doc Marshall arrived an hour later, having ridden at breakneck speed alongside Peter. After examining both mother and baby, he pronounced them healthy and strong, his weathered face creased in a broad smile. You did well, Gabriel, he said, clapping the new father on the shoulder. Not many men could have managed what you did today. Gabriel shook his head, still somewhat dazed by the experience. It was all Sophia, her strength, her knowledge. I just followed instructions. And saved both our lives in the process, Sophia called from the bed, where she was nursing the now quiet infant. Don't discount your role in this miracle, husband. As Doc Marshall prepared to leave, promising to return in a few days to check on his patients, Gabriel walked him to the door. Thank you, he said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of his gratitude. The older man nodded in understanding. No thanks necessary. But I will say this, when I sent Sophia out here with that pot of soup all those months ago, I hoped she might improve your diet and perhaps your disposition. I never imagined she'd transform your entire life. Gabriel smiled, glancing back at the bed where his wife and daughter rested. That makes two of us, Doc. That makes two of us. The days and weeks that followed were a blend of exhaustion and exhilaration as Gabriel and Sophia adjusted to life with their newborn daughter. Emma proved to be a vigorous baby with a healthy appetite and a remarkably strong set of lungs. Her cries often echoed through the cabin in the night, bringing Gabriel instantly awake with memories of another Emma's laughter. Yet there was no sadness in these memories now, only a sense of continuity, a feeling that somehow his first daughter would have approved of this tiny namesake who had brought such joy into their lives. Gabriel found himself telling baby Emma stories about her predecessor, speaking the name that had once been too painful to utter with a new sense of peace. Sophia recovered quickly from the birth, her natural resilience asserting itself as she adapted to motherhood. Gabriel watched in awe as she managed to care for the baby, oversee household tasks, and still find time to assist with ranch planning. Her capacity seemed limitless, though he insisted she rest whenever possible. "You don't have to do everything," he reminded her one afternoon when he found her attempting to bake bread with Emma cradled in one arm. "The bread can wait, or I can help." Sophia laughed at his concerned expression. "Gabriel Jacobs, are you offering to bake?" "I'm offering to hold my daughter while you bake," he clarified, already reaching for the infant. "Or to try my hand at the bread while you rest with her. Either way, you're doing too much too soon." Sophia relinquished the baby with a smile that acknowledged his point. "Very well. You take this little one, and I'll finish the bread. Then perhaps we both might rest while she sleeps." As autumn deepened toward winter, the small family settled into rhythms that centered around Emma's needs while accommodating the ongoing demands of the ranch. Peter Jensen continued to prove his worth, taking on additional responsibilities that allowed Gabriel to spend more time with his wife and daughter. The young man became something of an unofficial uncle to Emma, bringing her small gifts when he returned from trips to town and entertaining her with silly faces that sometimes coaxed the beginning of a smile. The first significant snowfall arrived in early December, blanketing the landscape in pristine white. Gabriel stood at the window with Emma in his arms, her eyes wide as she gazed at the transformed world outside. "That's snow, little one," he told her softly. "When you're bigger, we'll build snowmen and go sledding down the hill behind the barn." Sophia joined them, slipping an arm around Gabriel's waist as she looked out at the winter scene. "Her first snow," she observed, "one of many firsts we'll share with her." Gabriel nodded, feeling a profound contentment as he held his daughter and stood beside his wife. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted quietly. "A family, a future worth looking forward to. And all because I brought soup and was too stubborn to leave," Sophia teased gently. Gabriel turned to her, his expression serious despite her light tone. "You saved me, Sophia. In every way a person can be saved. I was existing, not living, until you came along." Sophia reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines that were now as much from smiling as from hardship. "We saved each other, I think. I was going through the motions after Thomas died, helping others but never really connecting. You needed someone to care for you, and I needed someone to care for. We fit each other's broken pieces." Emma chose that moment to let out a small, contented sigh, drawing their attention back to her. Gabriel pressed a kiss to the top of her downy head, marveling at how someone so tiny could hold so much of his heart. "We should start planning her first Christmas," Sophia said. "It's only a few weeks away." Gabriel nodded, already envisioning the celebration, the tree they would cut together, the special meal Sophia would prepare, the small gifts they would exchange. Christmas, once a day he had deliberately ignored, now represented another opportunity to create memories with the family he had been given against all odds. As the snow continued to fall, Gabriel Jacobs, once sustained by nothing more than coffee and anger, held his daughter close and stood beside the woman who had brought soup and stayed. Outside, the Montana winter transformed the landscape into a wonderland of white. Inside, the cabin that had once been merely shelter was now unquestionably a home, warmed by love and the promise of many seasons to come. 5 years later, Gabriel stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as his daughter Emma chased her 3-year-old brother Samuel across the yard, their laughter ringing in the clear spring air. The sound never failed to fill him with gratitude for the life he now led, so different from the solitary existence he had once endured. The ranch had prospered under the combined efforts of Gabriel and Sophia. With Peter Jensen's help, the young man having stayed on as foreman even after saving enough to purchase his own small property nearby, they had tripled the size of their herd and improved the bloodlines. The Jacobs brand was now respected throughout the territory for quality cattle. Sophia had expanded her garden into a productive plot that not only fed their family, but provided surplus vegetables and fruits to sell in town. Her preserves and baked goods had gained such popularity that she had opened a small stall in the Pine Creek market during harvest season, with Emma proudly helping to arrange the jars and greet customers. The original cabin still stood, now serving as Peter's residence, while the main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family and Sophia's insistence on having space for guests. Gabriel had initially resisted the idea of such expansion, but as with most of Sophia's suggestions, he had eventually recognized the wisdom in it. "Watching the children?" Sophia asked, joining him on the porch with a mug of coffee in each hand, his strong and black, hers lightened with cream. Gabriel accepted the coffee with a smile of thanks. "They have so much energy. Sam can barely keep up with his sister." "He manages well enough," Sophia observed as the boy tackled Emma in a fit of giggles, "though I suspect he'll be even more of a handful when he reaches her age." Gabriel nodded, seeing much of himself in his son's determination and stubbornness. Samuel had been born during a summer thunderstorm, arriving with less drama than his sister, but with an equally powerful cry that had announced his presence to the world. Where Emma was thoughtful and deliberate like her namesake, Sam was all action and impulse, a combination that kept his parents constantly alert. "Doc Marshall's coming for dinner tonight," Sophia reminded him, sipping her coffee. "He wants to see the children before he retires." The old doctor had finally decided to step back from his practice, having trained a younger physician to take over the care of Pine Creek's residents. His advancing age and arthritis had made the demands of frontier medicine increasingly difficult, though his mind remained as sharp as ever. "I still can't believe he's leaving," Gabriel said, a note of regret in his voice. The doctor had been more than a medical practitioner to their family. He had been a mentor, a friend, and in many ways, the architect of their happiness through his decision to send Sophia to Gabriel's homestead that fateful day. "He deserves to rest," Sophia said. "And to spend time with his grandchildren in Denver." She leaned against Gabriel's shoulder. "We'll miss him terribly, though." The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Peter was returning from town, his horse trotting steadily along the well-maintained road that now connected the ranch to Pine Creek. The children spotted him as well, abandoning their game to race toward the approaching rider. "Uncle Peter," Emma called, waving enthusiastically. "Did you bring the mail?" Peter dismounted with a grin, reaching into his saddlebag to produce several envelopes. "Indeed I did, Miss Emma, and there might be something special in there for a young lady who's been practicing her letters." Emma's face lit up at the prospect of receiving her own correspondence. At 5, she was already reading well beyond her years, a talent Sophia nurtured with books ordered from as far away as Chicago. Gabriel had built her a small bookshelf of her own, which she treated with the reverence of a scholar with a private library. As Peter handed the mail to Gabriel, he lowered his voice. "The bank manager would like to see you next time you're in town, something about an investment opportunity." Gabriel nodded. The ranch's success had put them in a financial position he could scarcely have imagined in his coffee and anger days. Under Sophia's careful management, they had not only cleared all debts but accumulated savings that now allowed for strategic investments in the growing territory. "I'll ride in tomorrow," he decided. Sophia wanted to visit the new dry goods store anyway. Peter nodded, then turned his attention to Samuel, who was tugging impatiently at his trousers. "And what can I do for you, young man? Horse ride?" Sam demanded, his limited vocabulary making up in enthusiasm what it lacked in complexity. Peter laughed, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders. "Just a short one around the yard, if your parents approve." Gabriel nodded his permission, and Peter set off at a gentle trot, Sam squealing with delight from his perch. Emma watched for a moment, then turned to her father with a serious expression. "Daddy, can I help with the cattle today? You said when I was 5 I could learn more about ranching." Gabriel exchanged a glance with Sophia, who gave a subtle nod of approval. "Yes, you can come along when I check the south pasture, but you'll need to listen carefully and stay close." Emma's face lit up with excitement. "I will, I promise." She dashed into the house, presumably to prepare for this important expedition. "She's so much like you," Sophia said softly. "That determination, that focus." Gabriel shook his head. "She has your heart, though, your kindness. I saw her sharing her sweet roll with Sam this morning, even though it's her favorite." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their son's continuing delight in his horse ride around the yard. Gabriel slipped an arm around Sophia's waist, drawing her close against his side. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Doc hadn't sent you out here that day?" he asked. "If you hadn't brought soup and stayed?" Sophia considered the question, her head tilted thoughtfully. "Sometimes I might still be in town, helping Doc with his patients, living a quiet life alone. And you would probably still be subsisting on coffee and anger, growing more bitter with each passing year." Gabriel nodded, knowing the assessment was accurate. "Instead, we have all this." He gestured toward their children, the prosperous ranch, the home they had built together. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real." "It's real," Sophia assured him, rising on tiptoe to press a kiss to his cheek. "And it's only the beginning. We have many years ahead, Gabriel Jacobs, many soups to make, many coffees to drink, and many reasons to be happy rather than angry." Gabriel turned to face her fully, struck anew by the beauty of the woman who had transformed his life. At nearly 40, Sophia had silver threads beginning to appear in her auburn hair and fine lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and occasional sorrow. To Gabriel, she was more beautiful now than the day she had arrived at his cabin, determined to feed a stubborn cowboy who didn't want to be fed. "I love you," he said simply, the words no less powerful for having been spoken countless times over the years. Sophia's smile, warm and knowing, was his answer before she spoke. "And I love you, always have, from that first day when you scowled at my soup but ate it anyway." Emma burst from the house, now wearing her small boots and a hat that matched her father's. "I'm ready," she announced. "So you are," Gabriel agreed, reluctantly releasing Sophia to attend to their daughter's ranching education. "We'll be back before dinner," he promised his wife. "Take your time," Sophia replied. "I'll have something special waiting when you return." As Gabriel took Emma's hand and set off toward the barn, he glanced back at the house, at Sophia standing on the porch with a smile that still warmed him to his core, at Sam now running circles around Peter, at the home and life they had built together. Once he had been a man who lived on coffee and anger, isolated by grief and determined to remain so. Then a woman had brought soup and stayed, and everything had changed. The coffee remained, though Sophia had improved his brewing technique considerably, but the anger had long since been replaced by joy, gratitude, and a love that continued to deepen with each passing day. It was, Gabriel reflected as his daughter chattered excitedly beside him, the most unexpected and precious gift he could have received, a second chance at happiness, a new family to cherish, and a partner who had seen beyond his bitter exterior to the man worth saving beneath. As they reached the barn and Gabriel began showing Emma how to check a saddle for proper fit, he silently thanked whatever fate, providence, or stubborn doctor had brought Sophia Sullivan to his door that stormy day. Some angels, he had learned, arrived not with wings and halos but with soup and determination, and those angels changed lives forever.